Hi everyone, and a very warm welcome to this episode of the Learning Journeys podcast from Lacuna Learning. We hope you're all keeping well, and in this very special episode of the podcast, we are thrilled to be joined today by Colin Kelly. Colin is a public relations and communications professional. He's also a PR trainer, as well as somebody with a massive passion for sports. He has had a really interesting and varied career as a journalist and radio presenter in a number of different environments, including Clyde 1 and BBC Scotland. So you may well recognise his very distinctive voice. Growing up, he was an age group swimmer, and I'll let him tell you the story of where that went and how he's ended up back in love with his sport again. I met Colin a couple of years ago now, actually, on a Sports Scotland podcast training course of all things. And it was during that podcast I realised how good the media professionals are compared to average punters like me. He also very kindly didn't make me listen back to my first attempt at recording a voice in front of the whole class, which I am still eternally grateful for. He is almost always on the other side of the podcast, but with an amazing story to tell. I'm delighted to have convinced him to move to the other side of the mic today and get him to share his own story, his own journey. Thanks so much for your time, Colin.
Hey, my pleasure, Doug. It's good to be here, and I'm glad that course was useful that day. It's great to see what you've done with your new podcast skills. It's a good listen. I've enjoyed quite a few of your episodes.
Thanks, Colin. I think we're still all in the wake of the professionals when they do it, but thanks for being so kind. As you know, we have a nice, easy warm-up for our guests on the podcast, so I'm interested in where you're going to go with this. If you could go on an adventure anywhere in the world, where would you go? Who would you go with, and what would you do?
I would go to Japan, and I'd go with my wife, Emma. We've been in Japan before. My brother lived in Japan. My brother and his wife lived in Japan for about 3 or 4 years, and we went and visited them on a couple of holidays for a couple of weeks at a time, but only ever saw a fraction of the country, and it was very much kind of based around the cities. It was just outside Tokyo. But saw enough of it to know that I'd love to see more, and probably go, if I went just my wife and I, we would go maybe more off the beaten track and maybe go for longer as well, and explore Japan in more detail. I was just fascinated by it, really enjoyed it. So yeah, go back there.
So we've had a lot of responses for Asia, but that is a first for Japan. It's a good one, obviously, with Tokyo Olympic Games, Paralympic Games next year, we hope. That's a pretty good one, actually. So you didn't disappoint, Colin. I wasn't sure where you were going to go. I thought you might come up with something even more unusual, but that was a good one.
I'm not a huge traveller. Any travelling that I've done, I've really enjoyed, but it's not something that I have a huge hunger for. And I know there's obviously huge parts of the world I don't know at all, but I think it's quite boring going back somewhere, but maybe doing it in a bit more detail.
Okay, very good. Listen, at some point I want to learn more about your work you do now and your work in media and so on, just an environment, a world that I know literally nothing about. Most of our listeners are interested in sport though, and I know how passionate you are about sport, so why don't we start there? Where did your journey in sport start, and I guess where did it go, and where is it now?
Yeah, well, my chosen sport is swimming, and my first memory of swimming is learning to swim while my mother was pregnant with my brother, or maybe when my brother was a very young baby. And my dad would take me swimming, and it was something my dad and I would do together at the Commonwealth Pool in Edinburgh, which is near where I grew up. I grew up in Pennycook, so that's where we went, and I learned. So I must have been 3 years old, learning to swim. Always enjoyed it, and then when I was about maybe 6 years old, I've got asthma, and at the time, the feeling was that, well, if you do more, swimming can help asthma, which I think is true, and a lot of swimmers have asthma. And there was an asthma swimming club in Pennycook, so I went along there once a week, and that was my first taste of they like a couple of times a year there was an event, there was some sort of swimming gala, and there was this competitive element. Then I did that, really enjoyed it, and then when I was 9. We moved from Pennycook on the east coast of Scotland through to Renfrewshire, Houston and Renfrewshire over on the west coast. And my mum was a school teacher, and she used to work beside a guy called Jim Park, who ended up, I think, going to the Seoul Olympics as a Team GB swimming coach. And she knew him, and she knew that he'd run this Paisley swimming club. So I went along there at 9 and went in. And I remember I had to go for like a trial session. And the trial session, the only time he could see me was while he was coaching the top squad. So I was 9 years old, turned up at this swimming pool, tiny, frail little wee guy, nervous as anything. And here's like, you know, Campbell McNeil and Jill Ewing and Arlene Ewing and these elite athletes who went on to Commonwealth Games, powering up and down. And I just remember tiptoeing along the poolside, and one of the women going, "Oh my God, look at the size of him." And just feeling really, really small and bad. And then I got in the water, and it took me probably about a minute to do a length. So that was my brush with top squad. And then I got put obviously in the I think the C squad or the bottom squad or whatever, 2 or 3 times a week, and that was the start of it, getting into Paisley Amateur Swimming Club as it was at the time, and it just grew from there.
Wow, I'm laughing for loads of reasons. I mean, apart from that being an absolutely brilliant story. One I will tell again in the future, I think. Alan Lynn, who's obviously now national coach, was on the podcast right at the start. I'm 99% sure that his original club was also Paisley. I'll have to check the pause, but I think it was.
Yeah, I think so. Paisley became Ren 96 after the sort of local government reorganisation. That was the very point when I left. Was when it changed. I was 18 at that point. I left just as it changed over to Ren 96. So there's quite a few coaches who've come through sort of in the time I was out of the sport, and I think Alan was among them. He never coached me, unfortunately.
Well, he talked very fondly about his experiences as a young swimmer going through that environment and everything else. It's just interesting that apparently all roads lead there in swimming. So presumably there was some progression from the being slightly out of your depth, excuse the pun, with the Olympic swimmers. There was some progression. What was that journey like for you?
Yeah, I was going like a couple of times a week, really enjoying it. That was in one of the school pools in Renfrewshire. And then during the Easter holiday, when I was just nearly 10 years old, and during Easter holidays, the training was on every day, and my squad sort of merged for the Easter holidays with the Step Up squad up, and there was a guy called David Nichols who would be the coach every day for 2 weeks, and I just was captivated. It was a step up. The guys were a little bit older than me. It was more serious. I think there was some other people swimming with me at the time that put them off, and they sort of drifted away from it. But for me, that really captured my imagination, and I was really sold on it. I just loved this coach, Mr. Nichols, and then sort of graduated into the other squad that he ran, and then it was like 6 times a week, including the early mornings, and more competition for the next sort of 3 or 4 years under him. That was the kind of best time of it for me, doing like the district competitions, and there was always the conflict with schoolwork at that age. But yeah, I loved it, and I remember at that age, at that time, all I wanted was to swim, and I thought that would be me. I thought, if you could be a professional swimmer, that's what I'd be. It didn't quite work out like that, but certainly that kept me occupied for the next 3 or 4 years at least. Okay,
wow. So why don't we do it slightly differently today? I think just given the way that journey is going, at some point that swimming journey petered out a wee bit, and you went off and got your career, and then you came back to your sport. Why don't you tell us a bit about how that swimming journey, petered out a wee bit, and maybe how that professional journey started, and we'll come back to swimming at the end.
Well, I think swimming is a sport that requires a huge amount of commitment, and when I was in my sort of early teens, I was pretty clear that what I wanted, I realised swimming wasn't going to be a career, much as I loved it. And I was really interested in radio and radio presenting and being a music presenter on the radio. And that's still is. It's very difficult to get into. And so I started getting involved in hospital radio. I started running mobile discos in the local area. I started helping out at my local radio station in Paisley, and that was taking up more and more of my time. And I saw myself. I guess I just sickened myself with swimming. The other big change was there was a change of coach, and David Nichols, who had been my coach, I think he started a family, could no longer give it the commitment that he knew it required, and the other coach just didn't quite. It just wasn't the same. Some of my friends had drifted away. The club had then merged with Barhead Dolphins. More of our training was in East Renfrewshire. It was in pools like Barhead and Neilston. There's a commitment there from your parents as well, obviously. And I guess I just sort of saw myself going backwards. You know, I was like 14, 15, and the kid that had come in at like 9 or 10 started beating me. And I thought, what am I doing here? And it became more of a social thing. I was spending more time chatting to my friends than I was actually concentrating on the swimming. And it's just that thing that I guess happens to a lot of people in their mid-teens, mid to late teens, is that there's there's not even distractions. There's just other things that you want to do. Other priorities take over. And that was me. And I felt I'd done enough of it. And if I never swam again, frankly, it would be too soon. And I had enough, and it came completely away. Had my career in radio and broadcasting, achieved what I wanted to do, and got married, started a family of my own, and then was running my business. And one of my clients was Sports Scotland, as you mentioned in your introduction. I was doing some podcasting training for Sports Scotland, or it might have been social media training that day. And someone from Scottish Swimming was on the course, and I mentioned it's nice to work with Sports Scotland. I did age group swimming. And she said, oh, how do you do masters swimming? And I didn't even know what that was. I didn't have a clue about it. So she told me about masters swimming, and I kind of dismissed it. I wasn't up for that at all. But then maybe about a year after that, my asthma got quite bad. I got a chest infection. I was pretty ill for about a month. Horrible, flat in my back, cancelled work. And I thought, this can't go on. I need to get fit again. And I remembered what she'd said about the masters swimming. So then I looked up the club I'd been in, or what it had become, Ren 96, and sure enough, they had a masters squad. So I thought, I'll go along and try this, and again, absolutely loved it. It came back immediately, you know, the bug came back immediately. Cracking coach, great people, you know, one of the best things I've ever done. I would recommend master swimming to anybody. And then that competitive element came back as well. So they have events 2 or 3 times a year. Obviously not this year, it's been, you know, horribly disrupted, but the last sort of 3 or 4 years, 2 or 3 times a year I would compete as well. And it's challenging with work and family commitments, but you know, there was a period where I was going maybe 3 or 4 times a week, and as soon as I can, I'm going to try and get back to that.
It's really interesting. I think probably a lot of our listeners can probably relate to that, having had some kind of competitive sporting career background, and then career, family, kids, whatever gets in the way, and then you come back to it. And I suppose I'm just making that journey back now, but maybe a wee bit short of that. But it's really interesting, and how wonderful that you came back to the sport you loved and almost had enough of a rest from it to remember why you liked it in the first place.
Yeah, but and also I think it's really good that these opportunities exist. I think I know it's challenging for Scottish Swimming and for the clubs sometimes to run master squads, and perhaps they're not as widely promoted as everybody would like. You know, it's resources, isn't it? It's time, it's coaching, it's pool time. It's a challenge, but all I can say is that it's something that I'm really glad that I found.
So I'd love now, if it's okay, to explore a bit of your career. I suppose what I'm most interested in is, having had that amazing background, getting up early, swimming, the discipline, all the things that come with that. You were then doing hospital radio and all the things I suppose we would assume you would go and do in the line of work that you now do. How did what you learned in swimming and in that environment help you as you began that journey into what you do now? I
guess any sport, any relationship with the coach and coach-pupil or coach-athlete relationship, I think it's one where personal responsibility. So when I was starting out in my career and trying to get into radio, I knew no one's going to give me this on a plate, but I can go and get it. And I think working hard as well, hard work is rewarded in sport. And again, very much I always had that work ethic and enjoy it. You know, when I was swimming, I enjoyed, my mum and dad didn't, but I enjoyed getting up at 5:30 to go and train, because I knew that most other people didn't, right? So straight away you've got that advantage. And I guess in my journalism and my broadcasting work, looking for the things that other people aren't prepared to do, and then doing that, because it is so competitive. You have to, you know, going the extra mile is a given almost, you know. So I think of growing up, being prepared to do that, and perseverance, like, you know, that it's not going to happen immediately for you. It's not going to happen straight away. It might not even happen at all, but it's still worth doing. The journey, being part of it, the pursuit of it is rewarding. And I was never, looking back, I might have deluded myself for a little while, but as a swimmer, I was never going to win. I mean, I wasn't even winning. I was getting into the West Districts, but wasn't even beyond that. I wasn't winning much. I wouldn't have been on the kind of development pathways as they have now or anything like that. And frankly, it was the same in my radio career. I had a quite high profile slot on Radio Clyde for 4 or 5 years. I got into Radio Scotland and did some programs there. I did work on television as well. But the fun of doing it was always about the fun of doing it rather than the status or the stature, which I think is why when it stopped being fun or when I felt it had reached its natural conclusion, I was able to come away from it rather than some people where they're desperately clinging to it. And I think that all came from the swimming. I think swimming gives you a self-esteem and a sort of an independence of mind, which has kind of guided me through a lot of my life.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I noticed there that you stepped away from your swimming kind of when it stopped being fun and when it stopped being something you wanted to do. And I noticed you carried that over into your professional career as well, that you had this amazing career doing this really cool stuff and like things we would all have heard of and listened to you on and seen you on and stuff. And said, actually, when that's no longer fun, I'll step away. I'm really interested for people like me who don't know that world at all. What were some of the high points for you in that journey? What were the most fun bits and most interesting or coolest stuff you ever did?
Radio Clyde sent me to New York for a few days, which is amazing. I've only been that one time, and a certain local authority funded the whole thing, which was even better. We had this hotel right just off Times Square. We got taken everywhere. Absolutely amazing. Loved it. We did a radio show from New York, which was brilliant. I was fortunate enough to interview people like Billy Connolly, a lot of politicians as well. Got to go to, I was at the UEFA Cup final when Celtic were playing. I'm not a huge football fan, but it was still, these events, these occasions, these situations to be part of. And I think from the kind of news journalism side of it, I think getting to see how things work, being able to interview, prominent politicians and I guess sort of see behind the scenes with things was great. When I went back, I did some more stuff with the BBC actually. They did a pop-up radio station for the Commonwealth Games when they were in Glasgow. And did quite a lot around all that as well. Interviewed athletes from all over the world and some of the fans from all over the world as well. And the whole sort of cultural side of the Commonwealth Games as well was great. So I guess that's, that's really enjoyable. And also this feeling, I mean, Radio Clyde, even now, has a huge audience around Glasgow and the west of Scotland. And that feeling of being able to go on air every day and make a connection with these people and invite them on and hear their stories and share my own take on things. That's what I loved about it, that connection. And as radio got more and more commercialised and more controlled, that was getting eroded to the point where other people were telling you what to say. And that's where it stopped being fun for me. They start trying to control what you say and the amount of advertising that you had to play as well. Yeah, I got what I wanted from it and moved on to the next thing. But it was great fun. Really, really enjoyed it.
And I can hear that in kind of like childlike enthusiasm still in your voice for those amazing things you did, and got to talk to Billy Connolly. I mean, if you just said that would have been a good answer to that question, I think. I'm really interested because you're in a very unique position as someone who has legitimately done the hard work in sport. You're up at 5 a.m. swimming as a teenager, and we all know that's hard work. And you've gone and done some really cool stuff in media. What do you think sport and business can learn from each other both ways?
Well, I think people talk a lot in business about the value of a mentor, and I think that coach relationship as an athlete has a bit of that in it. I think sport teaches you that there are a lot of people in sport that enjoy giving their time. The amount of sporting events that wouldn't run without volunteers. A lot of coaches, very good coaches, are not paid terribly huge amounts of money. There's people in sport that do it because they love it. They do it for the good, the greater good. They do it because they enjoy helping. And I think when I talk to clients in business, sometimes they think that everyone else is a competitor. And the shutter comes down and you avoid your competitors, you don't talk to them. And I try and say to them, well, look, you might find that people are happy to collaborate with you and you can work together on things. And so I think, for me, sport really shows me that the world is a good place, and so why wouldn't there be some of that in business as well? And I think if you found it in sport, then you maybe to look for it in business. And I think a lot of the mindset stuff can be similar as well. I mean, we hear a lot about motivation and goal setting, and I think there's a lot of people in business, they don't understand how to properly set goals. They don't understand about things like outcome goals and process goals and all these things a good coach would tell you. So I would like business to have more input from sport, and that's sports coaching, rather than what I think it has a lot of. Business gets a lot of just the motivational gurus, and I think motivation on its own isn't enough, whereas the sports coach route, I think, is a much smarter way of working.
Oh, there was a lot in there. This happens on the podcast sometimes at this point. I'll just encourage the listeners to just rewind about a minute there and listen back, because there was a huge amount in there. I've written down a couple of things, and one thing I just want to pull on, you talked about this idea of competitors versus collaborators, and you said sport shows me the world is a good place. And this idea of motivation, and how do we properly motivate people and set goals and work hard for them, and how do we coach people? You also briefly talked about mentors, and I'm dead interested in this. You clearly had some wonderful coaches in your sporting journey. I'm wondering, did you have any mentors along the road in your media journey, and what did they kind of offer you in terms of that support?
Yeah, I mean, I've never had a formal mentoring relationship, but there are people that I've been fortunate enough to work with. I mean, one of the jobs I had was I worked at a radio station called Real Radio, which was owned by The Guardian, and they were very big into, I guess, succession planning and developing and management development. They put me on a 12-week course of management training. And the program director was a guy called Jay Crawford, a very experienced radio presenter. I definitely sort of sought out his advice. I think he just volunteered it. He was just one of these guys that just would volunteer advice, and I was quite happy to soak it up. And probably there was a lot of times maybe where I would think that I was in the right or I knew best, and then Jay would say his bit, and I would, on reflection, learn that he was correct. There was, I worked with had a news editor called Heather Kane. We were fortunate enough to have sometimes outside speakers. We had a guy called Jack Irvin, who was a very well known newspaper editor in Scotland. He came in and did some training. So it was never a formal mentoring arrangement, but I was fortunate enough to find these people and work with these people from time to time. I think because I knew what made a good coach for me in my swimming, when I saw these same qualities in other people that I worked with, I recognised them straight away, and I guess kind of, hopefully not in an obvious way, but kind of latched onto them and soaked up as much as I could. At Radio Clyde, a guy called Paul Cooney, who presented Super Scoreboard, again a very well-known media figure. And I guess it's just soaking up as much as you can from these people with an energy, people that enjoy developing the next generation, and I think people with a broad range of skills as well. They're not so self-obsessed with just their tiny little bit of it, but they see the bigger picture. And I was really lucky through my sport and through my media career. I only ever had a good experience pretty much with everybody around me, certainly people more senior to me. And I hear, unfortunately, you do hear of people who don't have such a good experience, who are not given opportunities, or they're kept down, or they're held back, but for me, it was always really positive, and I'm very grateful for that.
Oh, there's so much in there. I've written down something. So this term, a critical friend, and I'm certainly someone that has accumulated those throughout my life. So people who are, on the one hand, they're on your side and they're rooting for you. They want you to be successful, but they're also allowed to tell you when you could do a bit better, when you need maybe a clip round the ear or told, come on now, you can better than that. And it sounds like you kind of did the same thing in that world, that you accumulated these great people that could support you on your journey. We could undoubtedly carry on talking for the next hour and be nowhere near getting to this journey, but I feel we should probably just pause there and maybe get you back and again in the future. A few things that I've written down that people might be interested in. This notion early on that for you, you said you were captivated and that something just really captured your imagination. So I kind of written that down. You talked about things you learned from sport to business, this idea of personal responsibility. You knew that no one was going to give it to you on a plate. I was going to have to go and work for that and persevere with that. I think there's a lot in there. And when things stop being fun, stop doing them. That's something I sort of smiled at when you said it, but it definitely resonates, stuff on that I do. And then just, this idea at the end, this idea of latching on to good people that can help you on that journey and help you to progress forward. So thanks so much for your time. Listen, a lot of people in sport might not know a lot about you, but probably want to know a bit more about you now. Where can we follow you? Where can we get an eye on what you're about?
Yeah, so I'm a Twitter user, and I'll warn you in advance that maybe I do sometimes tweet without thinking, which goes against all the advice I give clients. So apologies if there's anything you don't like there, but I'm at Colin Kelly on Twitter. And the business that I run is called Comsteria. We help organisations communicate more effectively. My wife's in the business with me. She does video production, video training. Comsteria.co.uk for work stuff as well.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks, Colin. So everyone give him a follow. I'll put the link in the description for the podcast. I hope you've all really enjoyed it. I had an absolute ball doing that conversation with Colin, so I hope you enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed having the conversation. Do keep an eye out for future podcasts, and obviously hit subscribe to make sure you never miss out. And at the moment, everybody, please stay safe.